On the question about those documents, there are 4 types of documents, I think, that you see dealt with somewhat often in this matter. There are healthcare proxies, there are living wills, there are advance directives, there are do not resuscitate orders. If you've got other kinds, I'm happy to consider them. A durable power of attorney maybe is another one, right? But what the point I'd like to make with regard to all of them is the point that it's really important if you sign anything or if you draw anything up. I think it's just really important to have 2 things. I think it's important to have a responsible person who really knows your mind, and I think it's really crucial somewhere in the course of those documents to say, I do mean to observe Catholic teachings on the matter, right? So that whatever you end up saying, I think those are the things that are crucial. For myself, I think the thing that's most helpful is a healthcare proxy. And what I mean by that is somebody who will actually take care of making sure that this stuff gets observed. If it's a spouse, if it's another relative, if it's a good friend, if it's a priest, a physician, a lawyer, whoever the case may be, I think that the person is really most important. And what I mean to say is that there are so many situations that we cannot envision all of them. And to try to do it by a living will, by advance directives, by certain listing of things that I do and don't want happen, I mean, good luck. If you can figure out all the possible things that you could come into, I'd say God bless you, right? But it's very, very difficult to envision all of the things that could come up. And hence, if you don't quite get everything stated, you're in a more difficult position. Whereas if you do feel the need to have some kind of legal statement, advance directives or a living will, I think the thing that you want to put in there is, I really do want to observe Catholic teaching in this matter. And so I reject any and all forms of euthanasia, active or passive. That is, I do reject euthanasia by omission and by commission. Right? By commission means some kind of physician-assisted suicide or self-administered suicide, right? That is, it is a direct and deliberate violation of the 5th commandment. So I think if you're going to be stating things, I think the thing you have to state is, I reject euthanasia by any form of active means, and I reject any form of euthanasia by omission. What I mean by that is the withdrawal of food, the withdrawal of hydration, any of the various forms of human care which themselves would cause my death. Let me take just that one case, the one we all know about, with Terry Schiavo. Again, it was such a very pitiable situation. It was a situation where our heart went out to all parties concerned. Let me stipulate some facts. Now, if you think the facts were otherwise, okay, then we got to go and redo the scenario for some other facts. Let me take that case as a proverbial case. Grant me for a moment the facts. If you think the facts were otherwise, then we got to renegotiate. I presume the facts to be that she was not in any ascertainable way that we could discern conscious and responsive. Right? Now, if somebody thinks that she was really responsive, that they could get the hint of a wink or something or other, well, then you're in a different set of facts. As far as I could tell, she wasn't responsive in any way that we could ascertain. Likewise, I think that she was not actively dying. Now, again, if you think the facts are otherwise, then we got another situation. It seems to me that what the relevant issue was can we withdraw nutrition and hydration from such a person because it was being technically provided? I think that the nuts and bolts of the decision in that case, if the facts were as I stipulate them, that what produced her death was the removal of nutrition and hydration. I do not think we have now reached the stage where we can say it's okay to violate the 5th commandment. That is, if we're causing the death by the removal of the way in which she could receive nutrition and hydration, we're now putting ourselves in the position of saying we may violate the 5th commandment. and we're not able to do that. We're not morally permitted to do that. We are physically able, but we're not in a moral situation where we can do it. Now, I grant you the complications, and we could add facts to the table, but my contention is what the fifth commandment does is oblige us even when it's difficult. And hence my saying and using that as a stereotypical case, artificially construed here just to try to make the case, is that if there's an advance directive, if there's a living will, if there's any other form of, what we're dealing with here, is that we may allow death to happen, but we may not cause it to happen. So in the case of Terri Schiavo, if I've understood it rightly, what we had was a situation where it was by the removal of nutrition and hydration that she eventually died. That is, her death was caused by this removal, and that's the thing that I'm saying is not permitted. So if we're making some kind of advance directive or some kind of living will, I think what you got to put in there is, I reject any form of euthanasia, whether by omission or by commission, and I regard the provision of nutrition and hydration as required and to be maintained so long as they are not futile. Notice, I add the condition about if they are not futile. That is, if it's actually able to be taken in and processed by the body, it is not futile. Whereas, if I'm making some point in the directives or in the living will with respect to must I use every form of medicine? Must I use every form of surgery? Must I use any form of therapy, etc., etc., etc.? Anything that's truly medical. May I forego the use of this because I consider it too burdensome in terms of pain, too burdensome in the sense of prolonging my life, risky, too costly. Those things I may forego. Right? So my contention would be, I think we're better off if we do this by a healthcare proxy rather than by trying to specify all that. In the case of a healthcare proxy, it is just so crucial that I get somebody whom I trust, and somebody who really does know the teaching of the church, and somebody who really does know my mind. Hence the need to talk it through. I think that there's something so important about talking it through, and hence in the case that we were discussing a bit about the person who didn't want to eat. Again, I respect that, and I can't force the person, but what I got to do is keep talking to them. Here, again, I don't want to just evade the issue by a story, but I think the story will help. For just a minute, if you wouldn't mind. It's a story from Robert Coles. Do you know Robert Coles? He's very interesting, professor of psychiatry at Harvard, but he tells in many of it, he's got this great book on the spiritual life of children. The book I want to call your attention to is a book called The Call of Stories. In that book, it's autobiographical, and it's about his own use of techniques in psychiatric practice, dealing with depression, dealing with all sorts of things. And what he tells, among other things, is he was having trouble early in his professional career in getting people to give them the information that he needed with respect even to making a diagnosis, let alone with respect to what it is that he wanted to prescribe, because people tended to use the buzzwords in psychiatry, but they don't always use the buzzwords correctly. And so for the longest time he felt frustrated because he wasn't even getting the information he needed. But he remembered how important stories were early on in his own life, in his family, he and his sister, with the parents. And it came to his idea, to his mind, I bet you we could do something with this. And so what he urged is that his patients not use any of the technical words, but rather simply tell their story, talk it through. And he said, not only did I get better information with regard to diagnosis, because they weren't misusing the technical terms, but not only was I getting better information, and I could make a better assessment, but the very act of telling the story helped a person talk things through. Even the storytelling is to a certain degree therapeutic. Well, to apply that to our case at hand, I grant you that sometimes a person in depression, in discouragement, feeling utterly blue, etc., will want to make something that will not use some particular form of therapy, some particular form of pain management, some particular form of whatever. But this is why you got to keep talking it through. If I had listened simply to my dear mother, she said, I never want to be in a nursing home. Well, that's great, Mom. I hope I can be at home to take care of you. But it was a question, my brother and myself, what are we going to do after Dad died? How are we going to handle this? My dear sister-in-law said, oh, I'll take her. My brother and I said, this is going to last for 2 weeks. She took her. After 3 days, Kathy was willing to, say, I don't know how you spell that, but that's what she said. Thankfully, I was able to arrange for St. Patrick's Nursing Home in the Bronx, wonderful care by the dear Carmelite Sisters of the Aged and Infirm, and it meant, about a mile down the street from me at Fordham, I could see her virtually every day, get in there. We had all sorts of interesting experiences. Again, Mom found the nursing home hard to adjust to. In particular, what's called the sunsetter syndrome. Do you know about the sunsetter syndrome? What they find in nursing homes is that the people can more or less accept it most of the day. There's enough organized joy. There's, perky, spontaneous people who keep you active. But near the time of sundown, the people get agitated. They know they're not home. They get really excited. They get really frustrated because they want to go home. They don't know what state they're in, let alone, where home is. And you got to help them through the sunset time. And then after the sun goes down, they're more or less content. And again, what my mom found was really difficult the first month, somewhat less difficult the next 6 months, but eventually she gets used to the routine of the thing, and you're helping them get the good care so that they stay clean. There's nothing offensive to human dignity about having your bottom wiped. You did it for your children. Your children should learn to do it for you. There's a way in which that can be a source of dignity. Because dignity, while it is nice to think about it as when we're healthy and well, bringing out good care and bringing out real charity in another is really a matter of helping them with their dignity. That is, there's a way in which I think Alistair McIntyre, who taught for a while here in South Bend at Notre Dame, was quite right, that virtues that require are at various stages of our life different, and that even finding ways to elicit charity is of enormous importance. So let me finish this. With regard to those documents, I think it's possible to sign a do not resuscitate order. That is, not a matter of insisting on prolonging life at all costs. We allow a person to die, but in any advance directives, in any living will that we sign, what we should say is, I insist upon Catholic principles. Euthanasia is rejected at all costs. Nutrition and hydration, even if technically provided, are not medical. They are human care. In the course of doing this, if we can do it by spoon feeding or other mouth-to-mouth forms, oral forms, much better. If I decide to undertake it, I may now be in a long-term commitment to keeping it. Let me stop at this point. Would you like to go over into organ donation? Would you like to have a chat about other things? Up to you. I'm happy to go either way. I saw one hand before. Sir.
I was just asking about Attorney Shibble, and with regards to the feeding, could it be subject to ordinary and extraordinary means of life? Because she cannot take nutrition by herself. It has to be given to her.
I don't.
And, giving her the nutrition is sort of extraordinary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that ordinary and extraordinary pertain to medical treatment. So I think it would be something you would say, well, spontaneously, ordinary and extraordinarily, doesn't that refer to the provision of nutrition and hydration? And my contention is it would refer to the giving of nutrition and hydration if it were medical means. I don't think it's addressing disease. I don't think it's addressing illness. I don't think it's addressing a medical question. And hence, we don't have to get it started. We can continue to spoon feed, cajole. It's really difficult and costly. But what the church has come to understand, and again, it's toward the bottom of the page, if you'd like just for a minute to use the document to help me out in showing it. I'm on the third page of the first handout, so the single page. And that's Guidance from an Address of Pope John Paul. I'm looking there at the, well, both, I guess. The sick person in a vegetative state awaiting recovery or a natural end still has the right to basic health care, nutrition, hydration, cleanliness, warmth, and to the prevention of complications related to complications related to his confinement to bed. He has the right to appropriate rehabilitative care and to be monitored for clinical signs of eventual recovery. I would like to underline how the administration of water and food, even when provided by artificial means, always represents a natural means of preserving life, not a medical act. Its use, therefore, should be considered in principle ordinary and proportionate, and as such morally obligatory, insofar as and until it is seen to have attained its proper finality, which in the present case consists in providing nourishment to the patient and alleviation of his suffering. That is, I think that what he's saying in that is, it doesn't become disproportionate even though it's burdensome. The only time it may be removed if it's futile. Best I know. Sir.
Is it your understanding that she died from starvation then?
And that's what I'm saying was intolerable about the Terry Schiavo situation. You may not starve her.
She died relatively quick.
10 days. She died of the lack of food and water. And part of my reason in taking up the Terry Schiavo case, again, if the facts are different, I'm always willing to defer to the facts if you know the facts to be otherwise. My point as a moral theologian, as a philosopher, are the principles, right? As far as I can tell with regard to the facts, and that's why I asked one to stipulate the facts, as far as I understand, she died of dehydration and starvation. And I'm saying that is inappropriate. If she had died of other things, I can allow that she died. We allow a person to die. They would not, again, if I've got the facts wrong, happy to be corrected. My understanding of the facts is that they would not allow her parents to come in and even swathe her mouth with moisture. You say, what is that all about? That's about dehydrating a person. And I consider that unconscionable. Again, my point is not to stand in judgment of the husband, although I confess I don't understand how that husband's decisions are using a well-informed conscience. So while I do not know his conscience, I leave that to God. I deal with the objective, publicly ascertainable details. I do not understand how that decision is in accordance with a well-formed conscience. Please, be right there, Chris.
No, I was simply asking, when you say, I'm talking about brain death, they say, that's end of life, so anything could be.
Okay. I'm happy to shift to brain death. That's the other page that you've got. So if we want to shift, I won't mind shifting there. If there are questions on this, we probably ought to give people the opportunity. So I'm happy to go there if everybody wants to go there. Chris.
Well, Father, I wanted to encourage you to talk about organ donation a little bit.
Let's go in there. Okay. I got 2 votes in that direction. Anybody else want to stay on this?
And there also is an addendum.
Go ahead.
To that, in that the Mass that you'll be saying in a little while is the normal community Mass.
Right?
So Sister asked that you be able to find time out.
Okay, so we got 12 minutes. No problem handling brain death in 12 minutes. Would it be all right if I shift to that? That agree with? Somebody else wants to really press something. Okay, let me do it as best I can. Brain death was a category devised in 1968, a year after the first, within a couple of months after the first successful heart transplants. 1967. You remember? I still remember. Here, I was in 7th grade, 8th grade, hearing on the television news about the heart transplants. Within a short period of time, they realized there were not enough organs, so we need to provide a source of organs. How are we going to do this? It was, again, both understandable in terms of compassion, but it was also thinking from a utilitarian point of view. What they came up with, they set a Harvard commission to study the matter, and even that Harvard commission underwent various transformations in the course of its life, what they thought they were doing. Let me jump to where the rubber meets the road here. What they said was, we should change the criteria by which to determine when a person is dead from the normal and expected criteria within medicine, which had to do with cardiopulmonary function. That is, are you still breathing? Is the heart still working? Can we resuscitate it and get the heart and the lungs again working? and that what we should use is the notion of brain death. What the Harvard Commission eventually came up with was the following determination of the term brain death. A person shall be considered brain dead when there is irreversible cessation of total brain function. So there's 4 things in that definition. Irreversible cessation of total brain function. Now, as you know, there are many functions in the brain and various kinds of electrical activity which can be measured. The initial definitions talked about total brain function. That is, we've got various functions, and what we should deal with are those various functions and measure them in appropriate ways. How long should you measure it? How long do they have to have ceased? A minute? 2 minutes? A half an hour? A day? Etc., etc. Increasingly, there is pressure to try to make the determinations relatively short, and the reason is, again, very simple. You cannot transplant a dead organ. If the organ has died, it ain't of any use. You've got to have something that is still useful. In order to have something useful, what they want to do is to say, we're going to determine the brain to be dead as sufficient to indicate that the person is dead, so that the rest of the organs, or the organs we're interested in, will still be useful for transplantation. Let me shift to a different thing, get away from the Harvard criterion into more the area of Catholic philosophy, Catholic theology, what I consider to be good sense. It seems to me that there is only one soul per customer. What we mean by the soul is the life principle. You cannot see a soul directly. I can't go and look in your eyes and say there's a soul there. Sometimes I can look in your eyes and say, I know there's a soul there because I see you nodding or disagreeing or questioning. When I look in the eyes of my freshmen, some days I'm not too sure. Right? No, just teasing, right? But the claim is that soul is the name we give to the life principle that is throughout the body. And what we say is we cannot empirically see a soul. What we see are the signs of activity, so motion, various forms of life activity. And we say that there's a unity to us. So that it is by one and the same soul or life principle that I think, and that I breathe, and that my heart works, and that my toenails grow. There aren't separate souls there. There is one and the same soul. So that even if a given organ has died, even if a given organ needs to be, heaven forfend, cut off because it is putrefying, it doesn't mean the rest of us is dead. This, I think, is also the case with regard to the brain. That even if a certain part of the brain has atrophied, even if a certain part of the brain is no longer operative, if there still is life within the system, that needs to be respected. Interestingly, within the current medical literature, they have now discovered that any number of our functions are not even controlled by the brain. That a good portion of our heart rhythms, a good portion of our breathing, is at least not under the exclusive control of the brain, some of it not under the control of the brain at all, but of control precisely by other things within the spinal column and the nerve system, some things even within the control of the heart itself. Some very interesting material has been discovered in this regard. Hence, I think that what the standard must be is this: organ transplantation is permissible only if it is done by an act of charity and of a paired organ that is not a vital organ. So may one give a kidney? And the answer is yes, one may. May one give a part of a lung? May one give a part of something else that is a paired organ? Yes, in charity. One may not sell it. One may not treat the body as if one owned it. I dealt with that back in the first part earlier on, that we do not own our bodies but are our stewards. But we may not transplant an unpaired vital organ, because if the organ is still suitable for transplantation because still living, we haven't died yet. And the act of removing it for transplantation will be the thing that kills us. Hence, I do not think that you may sign the back of your driver's license. By way of interesting anecdotal evidence, one of the things that has now been coming to light is that the people who work on transplantation teams generally won't sign their driver's licenses. Isn't that an interesting piece of information? That is, they are mindful. It absolutely freaks out any number of the nurses to see the reactions that you get, admittedly of a somewhat mechanical nature when the incisions are made. But they have a strong sense of the fact that there is something else going on here. But to put it in terms of, say, our philosophy and our theology, admittedly in brief compass, it seems to me that what you have to say is one may not agree to the transplantation of an unpaired vital organ, for the unpaired vital organ's removal will in fact be the time of death and the cause of death. Now, interestingly, when just trying to ponder all this, one of the interesting things about the brain death determinations is that our brains, difficult to revive, we're still learning some of the science of that. The literature, the professional literature is very interesting. You've read, for instance, about some of the kids who go under the ice and who, when they are pulled out from under the water, we still don't have an automatic way of doing this, right? You have to be very careful. You have to be very fortunate to be in certain situations where you can revive them. But even though there's no brain activity going on, if you do it right, in some cases, they've been able to recover without damage because of the way in which the because of the way in which the body has gotten that cold. They can do it even up to a half an hour. Likewise, methamphetamine overdoses. It is possible, if you're near the hospital and can get the appropriate treatment within a reasonable period of time, before there has been biochemical decomposition of the brain, there have been recorded cases of the recovery of brain function in methamphetamine overdoses, even though there's no electrical activity going on, with full recovery of function. Now, my claim is not that we've got this down to an art. I'm not contending that. Sir? Go ahead. Please tell me. Well, my contention is not recovery. My contention is you may not kill someone who's still alive.
The typical transplant.
And so I'm happy to hear that those cases are excluded, but my contention is that if there is still cardiopulmonary function, we do not have a dead person. I disagree then with the judgment that the person is dead. And my contention is that the only reason we have even that on the table has been an artificial legal maneuver to declare death when death hasn't occurred yet. One must allow them to die. So far as I know, that's in order to make the Catholic religious and ethical directives 62 to 65. It seems to me that they're talking about are kidney transplants and other things which are not paired organs. I do not see those documents 62 to 65 as talking about unpaired vital organs.
Well, we should get going.
Okay.
Community awaits us.
Thank you.
Wired for this, so.
Okay. Thank you so much.